views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Welcome, I'm Sharon Kuhn, and this is the Attach Attempt Achieve program. Today my guest is John Micsak. He is founder of the National Institute for Resiliency and Wellness and author of the Healing the Inside Child program. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so excited. I think in our new millennium, adults and children have so many new challenges. Can you help us understand that, how that's affecting our culture?
That's very true, Sharon. There are some staggering research and numbers coming in. For example, we know now that there's approximately 450,000 runaways in this country, and within 48 hours, 1 out of 3 of those children will be picked up and sexually exploited by an adult. We know that 1 million children are suffering from hunger in the United States. Parental time, quality parental time, has been reduced to 9 to 12 minutes. We've had situations with communities and neighborhoods that are somewhat broken up now.
Yeah.
We don't have the villages intact like we had in the past. Outside play has been reduced by 50%. In the last 20 years, our kids aren't playing outside anymore.
No.
And that is crucial for their social and emotional needs.
Yes.
United States is considered one of the most violent industrial nations in the world. So there's some staggering things, not to mention school pressure,
Right.
The amount of peer-to-peer aggression in schools. A lot of things kids are being faced with in today's world.
It's so sorrowful. I am deeply concerned. I'm really glad that you're here because I hope in our Fort Wayne area and in Northeast Indiana that we can take some trauma-informed care into our communities and help people, help children.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Where do you think that people need to start understanding how to reach children? What's happening in the brains of children?
Well, let's try to explain how traumatic stress impacts a young child's body. I'll do that by an example. A few years ago, I'm driving down from Michigan to Ohio for a clinical meeting, and it's a beautiful day. My heart rate is normal. I'm just relaxed. My palms aren't sweaty. My muscles are loose and not tense. My breathing is regular. I'm in a state of what we call regulation, a state of calm arousal, where when children are in that calm arousal, they can perform, they can concentrate, they can focus, they can be creative and have joy in their lives. So in a heartbeat, I'm driving down and I'm in the state of what we call regulation. And then all of a sudden, right behind me, a state trooper pulls up, blaring his lights, sirens blaring, and I went from a state of calm arousal into a state of traumatic reaction. What happens is actually there is a stress response system that takes place. I can show you my illustration. The first thing that happens is an arrested response. I stop what I'm doing, and there's like a shock that goes through my body. Okay, so all of a sudden, my heart rate increases, my muscles change, my central nervous system is kicking in, and my system, in essence, is going into fight or flight in a moment.
Yes, without a choice of yours. This is reaction, isn't it? It's not like you think about any of these physiological responses. Boom, 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 boom.
This is a very natural subconscious process, the stress response system. What happens then is I feel this shock response. I shut down what I'm doing, and then I scan. I scan the environment to see where the threat is coming from. In this case, it's a police officer. So depending on my prior relationship with police officers, my implicit memory has many stories about this, perhaps a police officer, any threats in my life, is going to impact my body's reaction.
Right.
In this case, I have enough what we call regulatory capacity to understand that even though my body wants to fight or flight, I realize I can't do that unless I want to end up on Cops, the show Cops, or reality TV.
Right.
So I know that at that moment, I have some skills or some capacity to negotiate with the threat. And actually what happened is I pulled out my Holy Cross Children's Services ID.
Not very threatening.
Not very threatening.
Right.
And hopefully trying to, touch the officer's paternal side. And basically what happened is it worked. He came back and said, "Mr. Micsak, please drive careful." And I didn't get a ticket. So in essence, what happens is the stress response system is activated. All sorts of things are happening to my body. Brain chemistry is being released. Cortisol, the stress hormone cortisol, which impacts our whole system, is released. Adrenaline is released, and those are your fight or flight chemicals.
Right.
This is all happening, Sharon, as you mentioned, without any conscious thought. This is built in our system to deal with threat. So in this case, when he returned and I wasn't given the ticket, my body returned to calm arousal or regulation. Okay, so there's a sequence there. The body, when under threat, goes through the same procedure. And in this case, not only did I feel a sense of accomplishment, I had an experience called pronking. Yeah, I feel good.
Yeah.
So actually, I was able to negotiate through a stressor and return to regulation or a calm arousal, and then experience this, have a positive experience from negotiating through a traumatic stressor. Now let's take that same scenario.
Oh my goodness, with a child.
Let's take in this instance, a 6-year-old child, and let's say every other day the bedroom door opens, and for that 6-year-old child, her biological father comes in and does unhealthy touch. Her system is going through the same traumatic stress, the same stress response system as mine did. But the unfortunate thing is, she does not have the capacity to negotiate or work through the traumatic stressor. What happens is her fight or flight response is activated just like mine.
Right.
Her heart rate goes way up, blood flow goes into the arms, into the legs, so she can run or to fight.
Right.
Obviously, she can't flee or fight because that's her father. So what happens then is her sympathetic nervous system kicks in. When traumatic stress happens, our central nervous system is activated, and it's making all these changes in our body. And that's only meant for short time, for a short-term situation in dealing with the threat. Survival. So she shifts into survival. And what happens when she can't negotiate that? Those brain chemicals are still going like this in her body. Her body is in extreme, what we call hyperarousal. And what happens then is that when she can't negotiate it, basically her body will collapse. Because the fight or flight is there for our survival.
Yes.
When you can't utilize fight or flight, the body goes into collapse. And that, in essence, is what we call traumatic stress or trauma.
And so for a little child, they don't have an ID to pull out. They don't have associative memories of having gotten through negotiation before. Maybe they do, maybe they don't in this situation. Their brain that would regulate those things is somewhat offline. All these experiences inside their body are knocking their thinking kind of offline to them, aren't they? Isn't it?
Absolutely. We understand that the neocortex is impacted by traumatic stress, and when the brain shifts in the child's body, the Christmas lights go off. There's no, we know through brain imagery now, imaging, that you can do a brain scan or a PET scan of a child's brain in those times, and there's no activity.
Oh, wow.
All the activity is shifted into that, what we call the limbic system, emotional brain, and even deeper into the brain stem, where a lot of traumatic stress registers in the body.
It's so important for adults to understand that children don't have the capacity, unless they're learning from the modeling of an adult, to have this regulation, isn't it?
Absolutely. We need to understand that a child can't, particularly at the stage of development they're in, they can't auto-regulate or self-regulate.
Right.
They do not have regulatory capacity in that regard. So what's crucial is that the adult involved in that child's life and begin some sort of mutual engagement, understanding, process expression with that child, so they can begin to understand and work through traumatic stressors.
Is this a good time, or should we add some other things in before we talk about attachment? Because from my understanding, and I would like you to kind of guide us through, without attachment, the resiliency is there, just not there for regulation. How important is attachment for their ability to regulate?
Well, I'd like to go through, a lot of us are familiar with shock trauma.
Okay.
Shock trauma, one incident trauma, has to do with Katrina, 9/11, a car accident. But what we're not understanding in the new millennium is what we call developmental trauma, which is really based on relational trauma and the inability or the interruption of the attachment process. Actually, trauma begins at conception in a child's life. We know that in the second trimester, the fetus can psychologically process. So if the mom is feeling overwhelmed and stress, there's actually emotional chemicals that go down to the placenta and impact the fetus. Right before birth, we know that the fetus's olfactory system is working. So if there's any, and that's the sense of smell, the infant needs to smell mama, have that sensory integration with the mother. And if there's any separation, that creates traumatic stress. Now we get into what we call the 3-year blueprint, where the brain is making rapid development. There's rapid development and growth in the brain. And it's absolutely crucial that in the dyad, or the caregiver-infant relationship, that there is consistency in affection and attention and attunement.
Yeah.
Attunement is really reading that infant's cues and being able to, an infant can't regulate their own stress. And what happens in the body-mind system is if there's not a consistent caregiving, then eventually what we know is the neocortex, the thinking brain, doesn't develop as appropriately.
Right.
So.
And the infant is just looking for a pair of eyes to be in love with them, aren't they? And to just build that sense of resiliency and value. So what are some of the chemicals that happen during that process?
Well, we know with stress, when a child, let's say a child is crying and let's say the father comes home and the father assumes the child is hungry and puts a bottle into the infant's mouth. But what the infant can't communicate is that, no, daddy, my ear hurts, my ear hurts. So what's happening then is what we call misattunement. The child's stress response system is activated in that all these chemicals such as cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline are released, and the only one that can manage that is the caregiver.
Yes.
So when the caregiver comes in and appropriately attunes to the child or the infant, then what happens is actually it releases endorphins and oxytocin. Oxytocin is what we call the bonding chemical. Oxytocin is the anti-stress hormone that is registered in the body when that caregiver either looks into that infant's eyes or begins to change the diaper, feed the child, or regulate that stress. So it's crucial that caregivers are available Usually I refer to the mother, but it also involves any other primary caregivers.
Right. So this is what actually brings me to my next question, which is our children, whether we're at the park with them, in the classroom with them, at the library with them, they are dependent on us being capable of our own self-discovery and our own ability to know how to regulate our own emotions. And so how do we fit this into the picture? How do we teach adults how to do the self-discovery work themselves, or how important is that self-evaluation so we're not harming our children or leaving out, some of this emotional regulation that they need to have modeled?
Well, in my program, Healing the Inside Child, what we do is we do some intensive workshops and seminars and boot camps. But the first day or two is all about us. It's about the adults. It's our self-exploration.
Yes.
We really need to understand that probably 90% of us have experienced a traumatic event in our lifetime. Of adults, 60% of adult men, research indicates, has experienced a severely traumatic experience, and 50% of adult women. We don't all develop post-traumatic stress disorder, but what can happen is that we may carry some anxiety. We may have certain fears, phobias. It may come back in our dream patterns where we feel a sense of vulnerability, wake up in the middle of the night. A parent or a mother or father might be sitting there and get this urge of anger, and a lot of times we're wondering, where's that coming from?
Right.
So it's crucial from our bias that the parents or the caregivers, practitioners in the field, do some self-exploration, because if you can't honor your own pain, you can't honor the pain of a child.
No.
And it's really crucial for us to revisit, to some extent, our own events in our lives, to make ourselves available to maltreated children.
It's so true, isn't it, that when we don't know that we are dysregulated or that we're high anxiety, that we're in an unhealthy mode, boy, our children do.
Yes.
Wow, and they will blame themselves, won't they? In their minds, they will take on a sense of, this must be because my value's not enough, this must be because, and they'll have these belief systems that they can operate out of if they are not downloading from us a sense of healthy, positive, being delighted in.
Yeah, thank you for stating that, Sharon. What's really happening when we do trauma work with children, in essence, healing takes place in this 3-foot window. We call it the neurophysiological feedback loop. We know now that there's an energy flow that's so crucial in a child's life. 365, 24/7. We take a look at, the restoration of the central nervous system, the balancing the central nervous system, and healing has to do with relationship, has to do with restorative relationships and the understanding what a child's journey has been, and to be able to approach that child in a way that understands. This is such a powerful, brain research has come in now and given us permission now to really go in there and change some of our traditional approaches. In the field, and this is my bias, I believe that we have been, and I've been in the field 33 years and seen all sorts of approaches, but one thing is we have to get away from a behavioral biased approach where we're using timeouts and consequences and rewards and punishments, and understand the healing really takes place through a relational approach. I'm not saying that adults, individuals have to take away all their behavioral approaches, but in our bias, the sequence has to do with relating with kids from the heart.
Yes.
And that's where this feedback loop comes in. What this means is that there's energy flow between you and I right now. And you stated it a moment ago. Children read us. They read our nonverbals. They read every step we take. And they are so hungry for affection and attention. So it's crucial to really understand that.
It is really falsely thought that children are so resilient. Oh my goodness, we just absolutely cannot assume that and not pay attention to the level or the amount of children being put on psychotropic drugs. And, in a sense, we're kind of turning off that little smoke detector on the inside of them saying there's a problem as they're acting out. And do we really want to just kind of turn off that smoke detector and pretend like they're not just smoking out the ears with need, and just go on with our lives and just shut down the behavior. We've got to get to the trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Resiliency can only happen when children reach what I call a zone, an optimal zone of healing or performance. Let's take a look at a slide if we can.
I love this.
And I will like to demonstrate or kind of explain the zone. What happens with traumatic stress is that many kids the brain shifts into either what we call hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Hyperarousal are kids that act out with aggression, hyperactivity, fight or flight mode. They're really living in survival mode.
Right.
They're hypervigilant. They're the ones that walk by and they'll look at you. What are you looking at?
Can I ask you a question right here then? And I don't want you to forget your thought. So is that just a bad attitude, or is that neurologically where they are?
Well, we need to understand that negative behavior is not willful misconduct. It's not willful misconduct to get under your nerves. It's not willful misconduct to disobey. Most of this is subconscious behavior, okay? And it's triggered by the brain-body system, a central nervous system that hasn't developed appropriately. It's kind of like inside, a lot of these children are churning and churning. It's like a little, again, in a constant state of survival or dysregulation. Fear is huge, and children in fear have to present in either, again, the brain shifts into hyperarousal, aggression, hyperactivity, hypervigilance, or it can shift into hypoarousal. I'm sure we all have seen kids that are withdrawn, isolate themselves. Many times those children get mislabeled as lazy. But our understanding is that they're probably in overwhelm and they're out of their zone, or the zone of regulation or optimal healing or performance. That zone is when that central nervous system is balanced. That zone is also called a window of tolerance. We can deal and negotiate through life. We have regulatory capacity. And the zone really sequentially has to do with our biology first. So we have to address a child's biology. And we do this through many means, through relationship, mutual engagement with caregivers, sensory interventions, sensory strategies. And then once we get the biology of a child's body modulated, then we move into more of the emotional brain, where they're able to attach and bond. They're able to identify feelings. But so many times we skip that sequence. We don't understand what their body is experiencing in the moment. And we jump into a cognitive process or a behavioral process, which is a consequence, a reward, or punishment. A child can't even understand a consequence unless they're hanging out in the thinking brain. And understandably, most of our children of trauma are shifted into lower brain regions, such as the limbic or emotional brain, or the brain stem or survival brain. So yeah, it's very important to understand that.
And I just want to reiterate again, before we go on to more, that often this can this not be in homes where parents love their children, but I've heard it said that children have now about 1/24 of the amount of human contact that is needed, and that we've really had over history, but as a result of the new millennium, as a result of this industrialized lifestyle that we have, 1/24 of the amount of human contact they need. Eye to eye, heart to heart. The little friends are in carriers. They're not up against our skin as infants. They're in a carrier, they're in front of a television, they've got screen time, ultra stimulus, and it's harming their brain. They're just not getting this resilience that they need.
And it's an unfortunate trend in our society right now, is the amount of insecure attachment. I've heard research now that perhaps 60 to 70% of children and adolescents aren't securely attached in our culture, in our society. And like you said, Sharon, there's many barriers or factors that are happening in the new millennium, such as everyone's on fast forward, everyone's multitasking. In my hometown, well, in my state of Michigan, some startling research came out that 38% of newborns are born into a single-parent family. So you have a mom that's overwhelmed. We don't have the kinship support. We don't have grandmothers and grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors. We don't have the community to support our children anymore. We think in today's world that good daycare is 4 children to 1 staff member.
Oh my goodness.
But historically in hunter-gatherer groups, it was very common to have 4 adults available for each child. So we're seeing trends in society where these children are not getting that attachment.
Right.
It's not happening. And there's other obstacles. Even if you do have, getting back to my hometown, Saginaw,
Yeah.
Staggering, and we're kind of a GM town with a lot of unemployment. 72% of newborns in 2010 were born to a single-parent family.
Wow.
That's staggering. I mean, so we have to
that's
look at the
painful.
implications.
Oh my goodness, that's so painful.
And even if there are 2 parents at home, we have a working mother and a working father, and many times they're stressed. If they're multitasking, if they're on fast forward, they're not always coming home to engage with their children.
And it's an enormous maturity task in the brain, isn't it, for new step parents on the scene to be able to emotionally regulate under all that transition and then be able to model that to children. That's a high maturity task. Wow.
Absolutely, and we know now divorce rates 50 to 55%, and in blended families, step families, if you will, 75%. So even if a child is born with 2 parents at home, chances are in their throughout their childhood development, there's going to be separation. So these are staggering, absolutely staggering numbers. So we have to take a look at that.
And we can call this, by many things, trauma-informed care, brain-based interventions. What are some things that people can understand are interchangeable for words for the kind of things we're talking about? If they want to go talk to their neighbor, if they want to look up something, and I would encourage you to go to John's website, healingtheinsidechild.com, and look at the programs available there. But there are a lot of words that are somewhat interchangeable. We may use trauma-informed care. That's kind of my favorite, but that is not actually what people understand the most, because again, we often think trauma is a car accident, Katrina, and we don't relate that this little infant has just not had enough of mom's eyes, not had enough of dad's eyes. We have to help the communities, don't we? Realize this is imperative, that we heal our communities, that we look at the inside child. Goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with us. It starts with a greater understanding, and in particular, again, understand when a child is acting out, perhaps. Look a little deeper into the core issue. Don't settle on the outside behavior. The behavior is only an attempt to communicate probably some fear, distress, overwhelm. When I train, whether it's therapists or online staff or foster parents, I always ask them to look at not an angry child. They may be presenting with anger, but I want you to look at a child full of fear and stress.
Right.
So once you do that, it changes your approach. It changes your own response to that child, and perhaps you'll be a little more empathic and understand that maybe this child needs mutual engagement. Appropriate, positive energy flow, an adult that can help them work through their pain pathways, work through their pain, not dismiss the pain, not walk away from the pain, okay?
Or misread the pain.
Misread the pain, but to understand, a lot of our children are acting out in pain, and it's pain-based behavior. They really need a lifeline. They really need our support. And like you said, whether it's a teacher in the classroom, mutually engaging a student, a pat on the back, physical affection, eye-to-eye contact, making some sort of positive gesture, welcoming children, smiling at children. And there's so many basic things that are missing in a child's day-by-day experience. We know that, for example, in today's world, 80% of adolescents feel that we don't acknowledge their humanity.
Oh, yes.
80%. So we're not even engaging our young people.
And tell me the if you're remembering the stats on suicide. What's the time of day most suicides take place for children, for teens?
Well, this is all related to connection at home or disconnection at home. We know that after school is a very stressful period of time. In fact, one of our interventions is called transitional time in. We don't do time out. We do what we call time in, and that is when a child is beyond their window of tolerance, when they're out of the zone, okay, they have shifted into either hyperarousal, aggression, or down to, I am overwhelmed. I cannot deal with life.
Their
I'm
brain
shutting
is
you
doing
out.
this.
I'm turning off. Okay, so that when that happens, you can't react with behavioral approaches. Okay, what we need to understand is that we need some perhaps mutual engagement. Bring that child closer, maybe sit with that child, walk with that child, spend a few minutes of your busy time, put that on hold, and really focus with eye contact and feel them heart to heart, and listen to children. We're not listening to our children anymore. Okay, as adults, we tend to formulate. We're thinking about what to say or to fix it. We don't want to enter that pathway with children in terms of helping them co-regulate that pain experience.
And why would we not? Because we're not regulating ourselves. It takes time and effort, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is something that it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, some of the shifting, when I train parents or therapists or professionals, it doesn't seem too difficult to understand that, hey, we have to give children more love. We have to approach this differently. We have to understand when they've shifted into dysregulation that perhaps we want to do a time in. So but the difficult thing is we have subconsciously downloaded our own childhood rearing practices. The way we were raised has already been downloaded and scripted, and that happens from 0 to 6. That happens when we're children. We really don't have much say in that because basically the brain's in what we call theta wave activity from 0 to 6. It's like a young child, if you remember back before 6 years old. We're in a world of imagination and trying to blend in reality. Well, everything that's happening to us, whether you have a parent that is screaming or yelling or using corporal punishment, or perhaps in some way belittled you or wasn't there for you, wasn't there to provide you the shelter and love when needed, all that is registered at a very early age. And we carry those scripts into our adult lives, and subconsciously they're there. And unless you make a conscious attempt to revisit that, you don't have to beat yourself up, but it's just a matter of being self-attuned and begin to be self-reflective. And that's a process. I'm still learning. I'm still learning in the work I do, whether I'm working professionally with children or in my own family. I make mistakes, but I think I've really raised the odds in terms of really what it takes to heal children that have traumatic experiences. So yeah.
The internal model, like John Bowlby, wrote about after World War II. We have that positive or that negative internal model. And something that I would like to add, too, is that and everything that we perceive in our mind through that in utero to 6 years old, real or perceived, it may be our trauma. And discovering that and discovering our child's real makeup. What is that real internal model? And not projecting on one another or our children. And I believe a lot of adults have that inner child that they need support for so that they can find the safety themselves, so they're not living out of their thinking brain and their fear brain, but they're able to stay relational under stress with their children.
Well, one thing you're going to feel when you're working with traumatized children is probably rejection. It is very extraordinary work, and it's a commitment. And what you just mentioned, our own internal working model, will come up, and it may be, let's take a look at the working model the children we're working with. My goodness, they are so just so down on themselves. They have such low self images, very self-defeating thought processes. And if you understand that by itself, that they have this very self-damaging internal working model of themselves. Many of these kids are so full of shame and guilt.
Oh my goodness.
And shame is registered in the same place as if I punched you in the arm, in the brain, is that it's registered in the same pain center as physical pain. And that's how powerful and pervasive the feeling of shame is. Rejection, or I'm not enough, or I don't count in this world. Right. Getting back to the 80% of adolescents that don't feel acknowledged. We're not even welcoming children. We're not looking in their eyes. We're not acknowledging. Right. And that's one of the homework assignments I give trainees is to go home and try that on. Make one statement of appreciation to a loved one this week. Not because of A's in the classroom, but because you are my daughter. You are my son. I appreciate you because you are, part of our family. Because the average adolescent hears 10 to 15 put-downs a day in today's culture.
Goodness, that's enough to make anybody pervasively feeling shameful.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And we know that resiliency work tells us, for us to change our internal working model and start feeling good about ourselves, is we probably need 17 positive comments to every negative comment. Because those negative comments stick to us like Velcro internally. They just stick right there, and that's what registers, and that's what a traumatized child will remember. So the one positive statement just runs off of us like Teflon. So we really need to understand so much about how we're approaching these children, and not to give up, stay the course. It takes time and repetition. The brain changes through positive relationship and positive environment.
The brain changes.
Yes.
That is so powerful. So if I am with a child that's highly dysregulated, whether they are isolating or aggressing, putting their head down on their desk or bullying another child, for me to make eye contact with that child and reduce fear and attempt to bring his either ability or willingness online to relate to me and get this relational part of his brain online with me. That's my job, isn't it? Not to necessarily just construct new behavior in his thinking brain. Oh, John, we have to learn
you want to touch
this.
him in the heart. Go to the heart. If you ask me for some simple language to use, would be go to the heart first before the head. And what I mean by head, the thinking brain, the neocortex, which these kids aren't spending a lot of time in. They're spending more time in help me, connect with me, understand me, listen to me, feel my pain.
Right.
Help me because I can't do it myself. I'm not intentionally trying to disrupt the classroom. I'm not intentionally trying to disrupt my foster home. And it's a thing about really digging in and understanding that from a trauma-informed perspective. And we're not there yet. We've got a long ways to go. We have not reached the critical mass. And that's what part of I know your work and my work is trying to create learning communities and create an influence in the critical mass to just try to flip the script, shift our paradigms, and just take a look at this. Science is telling us this. It's not just a whim. It's not a Pollyanna approach. It is based on neurophysiological science. Body-mind science is telling us and letting us know what we need to do. We're just not getting that information out.
Would it be true to say, if someone's listening to this program, that it's not that we don't hold children accountable, but we don't misassign why they're doing what they're doing? We can give a sense of empathy to what they're doing and help them see that while this is valid, this reaction, it is not productive for healthy living, and validate why, help them understand their own brain. It's just enormous.
Absolutely, Sharon. This is not a permissive approach.
No.
This is an approach where for example, I worked in residential facilities for years.
I want to hear a story. Yeah, I can think of one.
Well, and I've worked with some of the toughest adolescents and children, abused, neglected children, and adjudicated youth. And I don't like to see hurtful behavior. One of my pet peeves is I don't like to see other children or peers being victimized or being bullied, or I don't like to, but here's the key, is intervene early intervention. Do something.
Yeah.
It's just what you do. Is it a healing approach? Is it an approach which understands not only the aggressive kid, but not only the victim, but also the aggressor?
Yeah.
Is an approach where you know where to challenge a child, where it's going to be resilient and it's going to pull out maybe some strengths. It's not going to break a child down. So it's really important to take an active stance with these children. What we tend to do is, again, I can recall a situation. I walked into one of our girls' units, and one of the girls she was banging her head against the wall. Okay. Everyone was surrounding her and just kind of go, "Oh, stop that." Well, that's where the understanding of traumatic stress and how a body gets into dysregulation comes into place. With this new understanding I have, I walked in there very calmly, and what we tend to do are two things. What we tend to do are probably both inappropriate to really help this child deal with that pain. Number one is you get a parent that freezes. They do nothing. They act like it's not happening. They minimize what's going on.
They're overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I've seen that. That's their own fear, and that's what you're talking about earlier when you mentioned, Sharon, about doing your own self-exploration and how fear immobilizes us. So you have to explore your own fear. Right. So through fear, you have, whether it's a parent or a direct care staff, when you see a peer aggressing against it, they freeze, they do nothing, and everything escalates.
And so this little headbanger is continuing to bang her head.
Yeah, and what happened is, this is an actual event. The other piece I see, and University of Michigan actually did a study on this, about parental approaches. Obviously being under-involved, or dismissive, under-involved parent is not healthy. That's the parent that freezes and really allows too many things to happen. The other side of the spectrum is the over-controlling adult that comes in and says, "Stop that, don't do that."
Right.
Well, what's happening then is I don't want the child banging her head either. And what I did in this case is I just walked closer to her and I sat down and I says, "You can still, I notice you're banging your head. Okay, I'm just going to put my hand here." So I approached her and put my hand here, and all the time I just sat with her. And I wanted her to feel my neurophysiological feedback, which is calm, and she needs to understand that I'm relating to her. I'm downloading my, hopefully, a sense of empathy and calmness that her body desperately needs, because I don't need to discuss anything with her. What I need is to deal with her biology. So I'm dealing with her biology. I'm entering her pain pathway. And at the same time, if I can take your hand, what I did, I said, "Squeeze my hand, Sarah." And that was the young person's name. Squeeze it as hard as you want to. So she's squeezing. I'm working with her pain. Meanwhile, what's happening while she squeezes is she stopped banging her head. So what we have to understand is that overreaction doesn't honor the emotional pain that a child has. And underreaction certainly just leads to escalation and no healthy intervention. So in this case, just spending time with her, understanding her pain, understanding that she has shifted out of her zone drastically, and she needs that co-regulation you mentioned earlier. She needs an adult at that time to be her thinking brain, to be her brain that says, "We're going to manage this. We can modulate this intense pain and emotion." And that takes some extraordinary work, but I've seen some phenomenal work being done by foster parents, online staff, school teachers. Once they kind of get this paradigm, once they start shifting with that type of understanding, everything changes. But it takes time. And what happens is we don't stay the course. We tend to go back into perhaps an environment that you don't have the buy-in, or our own subconscious stuff comes up again and can kind of get in the way.
Fear
So-
precludes anger, doesn't it? And we start
Absolutely.
getting angry that this child's still rejecting us. We start getting angry that this is taking too long. We go into our survival brain, don't we, when we get overloaded.
Absolutely. And we have to pause. One of the first strategies we give when you're going to engage a child, and maybe it's a child acting out in a very extreme way, or just a child that has shut down, is ask yourself this: how am I feeling? Because that's crucial. We need to understand our own physiology, our biology. Am I stressed? What am I going to resonate with that child when I approach that child? And you know that most of how we communicate is going to be nonverbal. It's the tone of our voice. It's our posture. It's our space with the child. Okay? It's our rhythm of our voice. It's if we smile.
Right.
It's that eye contact.
Right.
Nonverbal, when kids have shifted into the survival mode, that's all they can respond to.
Right.
So we do a lot of work on just the nonverbal time in and how to do that with children.
Right. Now, I loved the story. Can we do another story?
Sure.
Okay. Young man, I believe it was at, is it St. Thomas? No. What was the name of the school? Or the
Thomas House.
Excuse me, yes, Thomas House. And a young man was pretty dysregulated and upset. And do you remember what story I'm talking about?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because when you're going to try some of these strategies and interventions on, it's not going to feel good to a lot of people. They're going to be confused.
It's going to look like you don't have things under control.
Yeah, it's not always going to look good to a supervisor, perhaps. But what happened in this situation? I had a 17-year-old boy that was in an extreme state of hyperarousal. He's presenting like this, and using a lot of profanity and threatening other residents. So he's looking like he's in a fight mode, but really, when you understand the biology of a child or adolescent, you get to read and understand. You really get to attune to their core biology or emotional state. So for me, I wasn't threatened by that. Everybody else was kind of circling around this young man, telling him, "You got to stop. You have to stop." Yeah. And he's just squeezing, his hands like he's balling up his fist. And what we tend to do through our own fear is to say, "Unball your fist. You can't intimidate people here." We confront that.
Right.
Well, in this case, I went up and said, "Hey, I'll just use the name Deontay. Deontay, take a deep breath." And he said some very, use some profanity. So he wasn't quite ready yet.
Yeah.
So I paused and said, "Well, okay, how am I feeling? I need to still convey regulation. I need to be assertive, but calmly." So the next thing I did, I says, "Deontay, do me a favor. I want you to squeeze your hands as tight as possible." And the staff and the other residents are looking at me like, "Squeeze my hands?" I said, "Yeah, just squeeze your hands." So he did that. And I want you to put a sound to it, like, "Ah!" So here I am, clinical supervisor, coming into this unit and trying this on. Well, a real fascinating thing happened. I was going to ask him to do this, but he did it on his own. Once he squeezed his hands, he went on his own. Yeah. So we're talking about discharging arousal, understanding when children are biologically, emotionally overwhelmed, that the biology has to be dealt with. So he did that. I said, "Squeeze it again." So he went from a challenging position into, on his own, when given the right understanding, he was able to return back to regulation. We didn't do any problem solving in the moment. He wasn't ready. So later on, we sat down and processed it with him. And one of the things we have to understand is you don't talk about making amends or consequences in the moment of high arousal or dysregulation. So we have to understand, so many times we're looking for that quick fix. We're not, if you just spend some time and validate a child, understand them, particularly at what kind of state they've shifted into, spend some time there, just nodding your head like you're doing with me right now, eye contact, hearing their story, spend a few minutes there. Time and time again, I see so many adults, even adults I train professionals, when we observe them in interacting with some of our children, they still jump to try to fix it.
Right.
We want to problem solve. We want to give the kids the tools and the skill sets, but there's a process to it. And we know sequentially, we work with the child from the bottom up. We want to work with the heart. We want to connect with that child. We want mutual engagement. We want to give them the right sensory input so their brainstem can relax and their central nervous system can become imbalanced. That's crucial. Then you can attach. Then you can teach. Then a child gets back into the zone. Once they're in the zone, that zone,
Amen.
the window of tolerance is what we're talking about. It's keeping kids into that window of tolerance. And there's so many wonderful modalities out there to help us accomplish that. But the primary thing, again, is relationship.
Relationship, absolutely. Just increasing that eye contact with calm, with voice tone that says, now I have actually offered some of those modalities to parents, and watching a compliant parent or a strong-willed parent try these on. Sometimes the strong-willed parent is such a power person, which is a gift, but not always productive for safety for a child. So if a person is a strong-willed person, they've got a little more effort, don't they, to kind of think, where am I using my power? Because I think strong-willed people feel like if they're not getting things under control, they're not being responsible. And to enter the pain pathway is the highest responsibility, isn't it?
It's a huge responsibility. It's very difficult. And if you got, I may reframe that as, you said a strong-willed, and that's a very kind way to view that. If you are over-controlling, adults that are over-controlling, that's generally out of fear.
Yeah.
Okay, some sort of maybe intrinsic shame or guilt or a need to have power. But don't get me wrong. I want our parents, our caregivers, I want
Empowered.
staff to be present. You need to have a presence with these children. You need to have, my definition of control is this: your ability to influence a child.
Yeah.
That is control in my definition.
Yes, good
and you
definition.
can influence a child in so many ways, other than, overwhelming them or over-controlling them.
Right.
Just as damaging as the permissive
Yes.
adult that just turns their head and does nothing to really engage that young person.
In either case, instead of being relational, we are either retreating or aggressing. But we're not really staying relational and discovering through relationship, are we? Before we get too much further, I don't want to miss sharing about your new book or your books.
Sure. We'll see if I have that here. Okay, I do have some recent publications. One is Healing the Inside Child Instructor Manual, which is what we do, a 4-day boot camp.
Which I appreciate very much, because I've been through that boot camp, so I'm so pleased to have
very
that.
intense and an inspirational week. We do some self-exploration, and we blend in resiliency work, attachment theory, trauma-informed practice, and body-mind science. It's really a whole week that blends all those disciplines, and this is actually the instructor's manual. And I also have a new textbook.
There we go. So we have a screen. We have a slide we can pull up there. Okay.
Healing the Body, Mind, and Spirit, groundbreaking approaches with traumatized children and adolescents. So this is, it's I think one of the most comprehensive books on the market. And again, I just mentioned all those disciplines that we're drawing from, and this book actually goes into more detail than the instructor manual. And of course, it's available online.
At healingtheinsidechild.com.
Yeah, healingtheinsidechild.com.
Yeah, very good. I just cannot bear for anyone to lose the resiliency building power of the fact that if they are with a person of any age that is struggling, and there's a power struggle going on, to understand the pain that is driving it. Do you think it's even possible that there are power struggles where there is not pain? Not usually. Maybe.
Not usually. I think pain is just, particularly in this area, we're talking about children with traumatic stress, traumatic backgrounds, adults with traumatic stress. Many of us have had painful events, and the children certainly have had perhaps numerous traumatic events through their childhood. So, in essence, get by your preoccupation about anger and misconduct,
Right.
and start looking at the pain-based behavior, the pain that's driving it, the emotions of fear, and the experience of overwhelm. Once if you can shift into that mindset, a lot of things will begin to change for you. And again, it takes hard work, some extraordinary work, but I've seen some very fabulous results in the last few years.
And I would like to see communities, here in Northeast Indiana, have your help in people understanding more what's happening in the brain, in the body, mind, spirit, body, mind, science, and using modalities that give them desire and capability of being a lifelong learner about self. Now that sounds like a me generation or me society. That couldn't be further from the truth. If we are having children or adults who are highly self-centered, that means that the infant brain is still there and they're not capable, are they, of having capacity to take care of community. And so it's just my desire that we be able to build communities where people work on self-discovery and they live with the joy of discovering. It leads to healthy communities. And so how do you see the future if we don't teach brain-based interventions in relational wellness?
Well, my thought and my hope is that within 20 years, every school, every most mental health facilities, most communities, juvenile justice, that the words trauma-informed care, the words of brain and body self-regulation are very common and are accepted into our mindsets or paradigms. We're not there yet.
Oh my goodness, we're way far.
Yeah, and it's really going to start with us with people with a passion that want to reach the critical mass, and it takes a learning community. For a child to really, I have one of my colleagues describes a child's experience, traumatized child in today's world, as this is the trauma vortex. No, I'm sorry, this is the healing vortex.
Oh, we
and
have 1 minute.
the trauma environment's like this.
Wow.
So the healing environment is like this, and the thing that expands the healing environment is for all these microecologies, such as schools, juvenile justice, mental health, spiritual leaders, business, to get online and begin to understand the need for trauma-informed practice.
That is an awesome place to end, because we just ran out of time, and that is just so perfect. This is the science of love. That is what humans feed on. That is what builds resiliency in communities. I would like for you to be able to go to attachattemptachieve.com or healingtheinsidechild.com and learn more about healing the inside child. Thank you for being with us. Until next time, I'm Sharon Kuhn.